What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the very controversial zero RB draft strategy. Now, zero RB has kind of been known as punting the running back position through the dead zone, where you're not drafting your first running back until like round 7 or later. Now, some people are very comfortable with this, others just absolutely hate it and don't want to consider it. I do think the strategy is kind of evolving over time though, because like I've talked about in my double hero RB video, my hero RB video, a lot of these strategies based around kind of avoiding the dead zone running backs, I think are kind of becoming obsolete just because I feel like the dead zone is coming to an end where you're no longer drafting round 4 Myles Gaskin. This year in round 4, you're looking at really strong running back picks like an Amarian Hampton, a Kenneth Walker. Even when you're getting into like round 5, round 6, there are still some running backs that I'm very interested in. And so I'm kind of just like removing the, fading the dead zone running backs from the zero RB draft strategy. And maybe it's not like pure zero RB if you're going round 5 running back or round 6, but I think strategies evolve, and I still think it could be considered zero RB if you're not drafting a running back in the first 4 or 5 rounds. And so in this video, I just want to run through kind of what zero RB is, how it can be used, when it should be used. I want to touch on some of my favorite running back targets if you are going to fade some of those early round running backs. And then I'm going to run through a couple of mock drafts, just kind of showing you guys what teams you can put together. But let's start off by talking about the strengths of zero RB, why you might want to do it, and when you should look to execute the strategy. So zero RB becomes a lot more viable with the more non-running backs that you can start in your lineup. So if you're playing in like a standard ESPN league where you're starting 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, you probably don't want to do zero RB because the running back position just takes up, such a solid portion of your starting lineup where it just doesn't make sense to completely fade one position, especially a position where you're, starting at least 2 guys on your team. Now, on the other hand, if you're playing with a roster setup where you can start 3 wide receivers and you have 2 flex spots, and now there's, other positions where you could slide in wide receivers, right? You can play more wide receivers. Running back becomes kind of a smaller piece of the pie within your starting lineup. Then I think it could make some sense to potentially go with a zero RB draft strategy. And so some of the strengths of zero RB, you're pretty much going to be stacked at all the other positions. So you're going to have really strong wide receivers. You're likely going to have some very solid depth. You should at least have like a mid-tier quarterback and tight end, but I think ideally you're going like elite quarterback and elite tight end, and you're just like smashing every non-running back position. But then you're in an interesting spot where you're kind of buying into just like the volatility of the running back position, the injury upside, handcuffs, where when these other guys are spending early round picks on like a Saquon Barkley, a Christian McCaffrey, if those guys start to break down and get injured, you're now rostering these guys in ambiguous backfields, these handcuffs, where some of the top teams might be getting dinged, they're losing their stud running back. Your team might be getting better because you have these depth running backs that are potentially stepping up into larger roles. And then also just like the running back position is different than wide receiver, where at running back, if a starter goes down with injury, the running back can step in and be super productive. If Justin Jefferson goes down, you're not expecting Jalen Nailor to step in and all of a sudden be a really strong starting option. So you do just kind of benefit from the volatility of the NFL season. Now let's look at some of my favorite zero RB targets. These are going to be running backs that are being drafted round 6 or later. Some of these guys might just be like straight up undrafted in a lot of your leagues. And kind of like the overall archetypes I'm looking for running backs in ambiguous backfields, guys who could potentially emerge. Like this would be like a Chase Brown from last year, right? Where he's in this committee with Zach Moss. You don't really know which guy's going to break out. He ends up breaking out, being a potential league winner for you. And then also, I guess Chase Brown checks this box also. I'm looking for young players, guys who can have like those second half breakouts or just like, burst onto the scene like a Bucky Irving from last season. I still think you can draft handcuffs, and like you'll see in my mock drafts, I will pick handcuffs. But I think you do want a solid mix of like players who could potentially be relevant right away, because you don't want to just be like throwing in close to zeros in your RB1 and RB2 spot. Like that's not going to be super productive for you. But my first target is going to be Travion Henderson. He's going off the board as the running back 21, kind of like a 5-6 turn pick. And I think he's a really interesting option where you hammer the other positions, you get 3-4 top wide receivers, you get a solid quarterback and or tight end, and then you feel decent about Travion Henderson as your RB1. I love his receiving skill set. He's a great third down back. He's on a young ascending offense. The Patriots spent legit draft capital on him. And I feel fine about him eventually pulling away from Ramondre Stevenson within this backfield. Then we have another young player, kind of a similar bet in RJ Harvey, where J.K. Dobbins might be the RB1 to start off the season, but this is like round 2 draft capital, someone they really reached to draft, versus J.K. Dobbins on like a 1-year deal. Also, Dobbins has just been really unable to stay healthy. Harvey also has a fun skill set, big play upside, very athletic, can catch passes on an offense that was very productive last year. Sean Payton as head coach, you do want running backs on Sean Payton offenses. Then we have a couple, some veteran options here. Aaron Jones, Isaiah Pacheco. I just think Aaron Jones is a very solid play. I think he can be a solid running back 2 for you, or, running back 2 fantasy production. Maybe he's your RB1 early on in the season. I'm not super buying into Jordan Mason coming in and forcing a really strong committee. Like, Mason might get work near the goal line, but I still think Aaron Jones is a very productive running back, and I think he'll have a fine season. Then we have Isaiah Pacheco. I think Pacheco has a ton of upside here, being drafted as the running back 27. Now, obviously, there's concern that he's just not going to be the same guy he was pre-broken fibula. Obviously, towards the end of last year, regular season, playoffs, he was pretty much a non-factor and was like pretty much benched for Kareem Hunt, or just not as involved as he was early on. But this is a guy who started off really strong in the 2024 season. He had a really strong close in 2023. And this is still kind of like a wide open, gross backfield where if he's even 80-85% of the guy we saw to start 2024 and close 2023, I think he can command some really solid usage in an offense that I do think could, potentially have a boom year here with Mahomes coming off of back-to-back kind of underwhelming seasons. Then we have Jaylen Warren, and I wasn't super in on Jaylen Warren throughout this offseason. I really like him as a player. I think he has a really fun skill set. I think he's very underrated, and I think he was underutilized last year. But it was kind of just me not trusting this coaching staff to play him, where I'm not a huge fan of Caleb Johnson. Like, I'm fine drafting him, but I'm just not like over the moon with him as a talent. But I felt like the Steelers going out there, bringing in Caleb Johnson, the fact that they gave Najee so much usage as opposed to Jaylen Warren last year wasn't great. And so I kind of just felt like Warren was going to be underutilized. He'd be fine, desperate flex play. But I'm starting to come around on like maybe the talent wins out here. We've seen Arthur Smith, draft a top-tier running back in a Bijan Robinson and put them in a very gross split. You also have Aaron Rodgers, who's not going to tolerate like Caleb Johnson, messing things up in pass protection. And Jaylen Warren is just like that solid veteran presence. I think he is going to make the right play. I think he's going to be in the right spot. And so I'm starting to come around on him being a really solid piece of this Steelers offense, just especially given like the coaching staff and Rodgers at the quarterback position. Then I like Cam Scatterbo here. He's one of those like young guys in an ambiguous situation where I'd probably favor him to lead this backfield over Tyrone Tracy. I think Tracy's also someone who, could be considered here, but I do just slightly prefer Cam Scatterbo. Then we actually have back-to-back teammates of guys I've talked about. I talked about Travion Henderson. I talked about RJ Harvey. I like both of them at price, but I also think J.K. Dobbins and Ramondre Stevenson are also very interesting, where with the 0 RB team, your running back room is going to improve throughout the season with injuries, with some guys kind of breaking out. But early on, you still want to field a competitive roster with like at least playable guys at the running back position. And I think J.K. Dobbins and Ramondre Stevenson both kind of fill that role, where maybe they lose usage throughout the season and they aren't super relevant to close the year for the fantasy football playoffs. But they're the guys that could kind of keep your running back room afloat early on in the season, and then you see those younger guys kind of pull away later on. I also have 2 Jaguars running backs here. They both kind of fill different roles. So Tank Bigsby, I think, is someone who's really interesting early on in the season, where it seems like people still haven't adjusted to the news that like he's operating as the running back 1, getting the early down work. He's going to have some touchdown upside. Not a crazy high ceiling, but I think he's someone who could be playable as early as week 1. And then you have Bashal Tutin, who's like the long-term upside play, where right now he's getting RB3 usage firmly behind Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne. But the idea is that like he's a young, fun, explosive player. He could have like that Bucky Irving second half breakout. Then Dylan Sampson, I think, is one of the most like mispriced players in fantasy. I wasn't even super in on him as a prospect, wasn't a huge fan. But you look at the situation here with the Browns, they draft him in round 4. You have Quinshon Judkins, who knows if he even plays this year, hasn't even signed his contract. He's away from the team. And you're looking at a running back room with Dylan Sampson and Jerome Ford. They had Jerome Ford on the roster and felt the need to draft both Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson. I think Dylan Sampson could be the week 1 RB1, and he's being drafted as the running back 47. Then we're getting into some of the later round darts. I have 2 Bears running backs in Roshan Johnson and Kyle Monungai. Roshan Johnson, RB56, Kyle Monungai, RB72. This just comes down to the fact that I think someone in this Bears running back room is going to be productive. Obviously, these guys do not compare to like Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, but we just saw Ben Johnson lead an offense with two extremely fantasy relevant running backs. I don't think he's going to have two, but I think there's going to be one guy, whether it's Swift, going as like a fringe RB2, or Roshan or Kyle Monangai. I think one of these guys are going to end up being really, really strong fantasy picks, and they're essentially free, where Roshan has an interesting skill set. He's a big running back who can catch passes. Maybe they work him in near the goal line. Maybe he gets some receiving usage. That would be cool. Kyle Monangai, just kind of like late round running back dart, where he's been getting solid reports out of camp. Just like, throwing darts on those dudes in a backfield that doesn't feel super set in stone. Then I have another rookie in Woody Marks, and he's really kind of flying under the radar, but I think you look at his situation. You have Joe Mixon, whose status for week 1 is definitely up in the air. They bring in Nick Chubb, who certainly could just be completely washed at this point. And then Woody Marks, even though he wasn't like a super highly touted prospect, they draft him in round 4, and they gave up a 2026 third round pick to get him. So they pretty much gave up day 2 capital to draft Woody Marks. They clearly have some sort of role for him. And the rest of the running back room is just kind of gross, where he could be a guy that potentially emerges. And then someone who I think is just a steal, even though it is a gross pick, Miles Sanders, running back 69, potentially undrafted in a lot of leagues. It seems like on pretty much every fantasy platform, there's this very strong assumption that Javonte Williams is going to be the lead back. From what I've seen from the Cowboys beat reporters, their training camp, that is certainly not set in stone. And Javonte isn't lighting the world on fire, and I don't think Miles Sanders is all that great, but it's just a really weak running back room on an offense that I think is going to be pretty good. And so if I can just throw a dart on Miles Sanders pretty much for free, I'm going to do that. And it's not out of the question that he could be the week 1 starter. Now, does he hold on to that role long term? I don't know. But with 0 RB, you're definitely kind of just filtering through the running back position and trying to find guys to give you playable weeks. So those are going to be some of the targets I'm looking at, pretty wide range in terms of ADP. But now let's jump into the first of the 2 mock drafts. And the first one is going to be from the 105. So like I've talked about, I'm going best player available. I go CD Lamb at the 105. Then I go with my guy Brock Bowers at the 208. Now, full transparency, Josh Allen was not my best player available here at the 305, but I don't think it's crazy to go elite quarterback in mid-round 3, and I would certainly consider it in certain platforms where quarterback is just way pushed up, and I did want to get one of those elite options. So through 3 rounds, we have no running backs. We get into round 4. My guys, Amarian Hampton, Kenneth Walker, both off the board. Chuba Hubbard goes right before us. So I'm just going right back to wide receiver with Xavier Worthy. Also should have said this at the beginning, but the roster setup here, it's 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and then 2 flex spots. And since we can only start 4 wide receivers, we did want to make sure we went elite quarterback and elite tight end, which you can see we did with Brock Bowers and Josh Allen. Then in round 5, we go with Tedero McMillan. Round 6, we go with Jalen Waddle. And then round 7 is where we take our first detour at the running back position. And we actually go back-to-back rounds. So we go Caleb Johnson round 7. We go Brian Robinson in round 8. We get another wide receiver with Josh Downs. Then we hammer 2 more running backs with J.K. Dobbins, Tajay Spears. We go Kyle Williams round 12, and then we go back-to-back running backs with Tyler Algier and Roshan Johnson. So when we look at this team, obviously we're stacked at quarterback, we're stacked at tight end. We have a top 2 quarterback in terms of ADP. We have the tight end 1, someone who I think has elite wide receiver upside at the tight end position in Brock Bowers. And then we have a really strong running back room. Love CeeDee Lamb as our wide receiver 1. I think Xavier Worthy comes with a ton of upside. I like our depth with Tet as our wide receiver 3. Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 4, Josh Downs, on the bench is a really strong wide receiver 5. And then we have Kyle Williams, kind of that upside play, young rookie option at the wide receiver position. And then we look at running back here, and let's kind of take a look at how I went about this. So Caleb Johnson, even though I did talk about how he might struggle in the pass protection, who knows how this usage goes with Arthur Smith, how does Aaron Rodgers feel about him? I still think in round 7, a rookie who I think could be projected for a solid early down role, getting work near the goal line. I still think mid-round 7, he's a fine pick. I think you can be in on multiple guys in a backfield. I think Caleb Johnson was priced fine where I got him. I also think Jalen Warren is a very fine pick, and full transparency, he will be in the next mock draft. And then Brian Robinson, very little upside at the running back position, but you don't feel awful starting him in your lineup week 1. And then with the potential concern about Caleb Johnson maybe starting slow, being a rookie, kind of getting eased into the offense, we have J.K. Dobbins, who can be super productive early on, and then maybe as he starts to fade, potentially gets injured. Then you have Caleb Johnson starting to kind of pull away. Then you have Tajay Spears, who some people might think is just a straight up handcuff. I think he has a little bit more committee upside. We have talked about them, wanting to get Tajay Spears more involved, kind of, increasing the split between these guys. And then with Tyler Algier, he is just like the pure handcuff. Like I said earlier on, I'm not completely against drafting handcuffs, especially this late. And then Roshan Johnson, still believe this Bears backfield is somewhat ambiguous. So I do kind of like the way this team turned out. Obviously, the running back position isn't going to be great. It's 0 RB for a reason, but everywhere else we're pretty solid. And in terms of like filling out our running back room, I think we did a pretty solid job. Now, this second and final mock draft is going to be from the 112. I think the 112 is a spot where you definitely can look to pull this off just because you have the potential tight end out in like the 3-4 turn with George Kittle. You also have potential quarterback options there. And then you could go with like a stacked wide receiver start early on, which is what we did here with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Brian Thomas Jr. Those are my two best guys available. We lock those two down. Then at the 3-4 turn, we go with Jaden Daniels and George Kittle, my quarterback 3 and my tight end 3. So elite options at both of those positions. In round 5, we go with Travis Hunter. And then round 6, we go with Travion Henderson. So maybe not like your prototypical 0 RB where you're completely waiting, through the dead zone, but like I talked about, I feel like the dead zone is kind of dead. Totally fine drafting Travion Henderson in round 6. Then in round 7, I went with Deebo Samuel. To be completely honest, I don't draft a ton of Deebo. I'm not super in on him, but I'm fine throwing a pick on him here because we do have Jane Daniels. So you have that stack. You're betting on Daniels. You're hoping Deebo can kind of come through. Then we go with our running back 2 in Jaylen Warren. Early round 8, like I talked about, could be very solid early on. I do just think as a player, he is very, very solid. Then we go 2 more wide receivers with the Emeka Egbuka, upside rookie play, and then Darnell Mooney, more of like that safe, solid depth option. And then our last 3 running backs here, looking at some different archetypes, we go Bashal Tutin, Dylan Sampson, Braylon Allen, and Will Shipley. So Tutin, more of like that later season, fun upside breakout. Dylan Sampson, even though he's a rookie, I think he could have some utility very early on in the season. Braylon Allen kind of feels like a handcuff, but he's been getting some pretty solid reports out of camp. Not Trump fully buying into this being like a really solid split with Brees, but still good that he's at least like fully locked down that RB2 role. And then Will Shipley is a pure handcuff, but I think one of the most mispriced handcuffs where it's like Shipley through training camp looks to be the clear running back 2. Is there a significant difference between like a Will Shipley in round 14 versus like a Ray Davis, who I can't even find him here, but like probably going round 11, round 12, somewhere in there. Oh, he went round 13 here. So there's not a huge difference, but on certain platforms like Underdog, there's I think like a 4 or 5 round difference between where those guys go. And I think Will Shipley could be one of the most valuable handcuffs in the NFL. So we look at this team. Obviously, I feel great at the wide receiver position, as you should going 0 RB. We have 2 stud wide receiver 1s with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., love Travis Hunter as our number 3. Deebo wide receiver 4. I'm really in on Egbuka this year. And then Darnell Mooney, I think he's a startable option pretty much every single week in your flex. We feel very good about tight end with George Kittle. Feel very good about quarterback with Jaden Daniels. And then running back, right? Week 1 doesn't feel great. Like Jaylen Warren will probably be our highest projected player. Travion Henderson might kind of start slow. We don't really have like a J.K. Dobbins or a Mondre Stevenson type guy to play early on. But I think Dylan Sampson could be a desperate play there. But like I talked about, right, injuries happen. Maybe Saquon gets nicked up. Brees Hall gets nicked up. All right, Braylon Allen stepping in. Will Shipley stepping in. Travion Henderson's kind of breaking out. Same thing with Tutin. Same thing with Sampson. So you can see how this team could kind of improve throughout the season. So those are the 2 mock drafts, and that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. Like I said at the top, you should never go into a draft saying this is how it's going to go, but I think it's good to just have like all the potential outcomes on the table where if you don't force yourself to draft a running back early on, you can certainly land the plane, given the right roster construction. So thank you all for stopping by. If you enjoyed, hit the like button and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.